Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 75, and today I'm here with Dr. Diana Hill talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. Diana is a modern psychologist, mom, co-author of Act Daily Journal, and host of the Your Life in Process podcast. Through her online teachings, executive coaching, and private therapy practice, Diana encourages clients to let go of unhealthy striving and build psychological flexibility so they can live more meaningful and fulfilling lives. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. The conversation you're about to hear is so meaty and good, and if it inspires you to go deeper into this work, I want to remind you that there is support available to help you. When I'm intrigued and want to take a deep dive into learning more about something, I'll start with books and podcast episodes, following people on social media or through their email list who I admire, who are doing good work in this area, and then even taking an online course in it. And there are links in the deep dive section of the show notes to help you do all of that. That feeds my brainy intellectual part, but understanding something intellectually doesn't always translate to feeling it emotionally, showing up with it in your relationships, or living it in your life. We can often benefit tremendously from the support of a person who can connect with us directly and offer guidance. My favorite metaphor that I heard, credit to Russ Harris, is that it's like you're climbing a mountain over there and I'm climbing a mountain over here. And from where I am on my mountain, I can see things on your mountain that you can't see. I can see an easier path that's just out of your view, or that you're using your pickaxe incorrectly, or that there's an avalanche about to happen. We're all climbing our mountain till the day we die, but we can learn to climb more effectively and efficiently, to enjoy the climb and appreciate how far we've come. That is how I can help over at sagefamily.com/coaching. A dear friend of mine and friend of the podcast, Dr. Cassidy Freitas, recommended ACT to me years ago. She utilizes the model in her therapy practice and teaches it at her university. So it started with Dr. Susan David's book, Emotional Agility, then Dr. Russ Harris's book, ACT Made Simple. Then I found your Psychologist Off the Clock podcast, and then I took the ACT for Beginners course from Russ Harris. Now I'm loving your new podcast, Your Life in Process. And this model, it's given more language and structure to the work that I had been doing for years with clients around mindfulness and values, making friends with feelings and storing thoughts. And of course, in the context of the kind of coaching I do, there's a significant action component. So I am so excited to share a conversation with you today, Diana. Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I see myself, I guess, as a psychological flexibility guide. And what that means is that I help people become more present and engaged and aligned with their values to have fulfilling lives. And that can be either in one-on-one therapy, coaching. I work a lot with therapists and with coaches too. Or it also is in the realm of doing workshops, leading retreats, doing talks like this. And I'm also a mom. So I bring a lot of these principles into my life as dealing with two young sons and wanting to be as effective and compassionate and values oriented as possible in that space, as well as in my partnership with my husband and my friendships. So that's my passion, really has been ACT for over a decade now. But a lot of it also is about bringing in body-based and contemplative practice, sort of the intersection of the two.
I love it. And I know my audience is just like, they're really smart, intelligent, hungry for understanding all of these kinds of things on a deeper level. And I really appreciate too that you can bring in that perspective of being a mom. So I'm so excited to dive in here. So let's start at kind of the beginning with what is acceptance and commitment therapy and its core pursuit of psychological flexibility.
Sure. Well, in some ways, I wish they called it something different than therapy, because it's much more a philosophy of living. And it really comes from an evidence-based model that incorporates behavioral principles around what helps people flourish in their lives. And it has this goal of helping people become more psychologically flexible through these 6 core processes. So sometimes I'll talk about ACT as sort of being like a Rubik's Cube, where you have these 6 sides to a Rubik's Cube, and together they work to help you become more engaged and present and values oriented in your life. And each of the sides do something a little different. So there's one side of the Rubik's Cube that has to do with how we respond to our thoughts. We all have critical thoughts, we have unhelpful thoughts, and often the way that we respond to our thoughts sort of makes our thoughts worse. So there's a side that helps with your thoughts. There's another side that helps you with developing acceptance. There's a side that helps you with being present. There's a side that helps you with clarifying what's most important to you, your values. And there's also a side that helps you take perspective on yourself and gain perspective of others from others, as well as a side that's all about committed action, just like how you actually bring what you care about into your daily living, and it's very behavioral and action oriented. So those 6 sides kind of work together like a Rubik's Cube, and you can apply them to all sorts of things. You can apply it to work, you can apply it to parenting, you can apply it to how to get yourself moving and exercising more in your life and eating well. And what it really boils down to is the core processes that have been demonstrated through research, really lots and lots of years of research that contribute to human flourishing.
Yes, I love that it's so evidence-based. It does have that, it's sort of based in that behavioral model, but it also has like some narrative and mindfulness and like a brief solution focused. It's sort of this melding of all of the things that have ever resonated with me in terms of life philosophies and therapeutic modalities. So I'm so excited for this conversation. Now, you mentioned these 6 core processes, and I'm really hoping to spend our time together today walking through them. We talk a lot about mindfulness in parenting here. So let's start with contacting the present moment. What might that look like for you, and how is it helpful?
Well, there's lots of reasons why being present in our lives is helpful. The most basic one is that if we're not in the present, we miss out on our life. I was just talking with a client who has a 3-month-old, like new mother. And she was talking about sort of getting through the day, getting on to the next thing, and all of the challenges of being a new mother. And I was looking at her, I was thinking, gosh, I would pay so much money to be able to have my 12-year-old be 3 months again and be able to hold him. I mean, just being present with our kids is part of the joy of living. So the first aspect of being present in your life is that you want to live your life, and your life is in the here and now. But there's other benefits to being present that are things like not acting impulsively. So if you're able to slow down and get present when maybe your kids are bickering in the back of the car, and take that mindful pause to just land in your body, get clear on what matters most right now, and respond from a place of more intention, then you're going to respond a lot better than if you respond impulsively. Being present is also really helpful, especially in the modern age where so much of our attention is being pulled in so many different directions. Attention is sort of a commodity that people are trying to purchase. And things like mindfulness and being present can help you train your mind so that you have choice where you are placing your attention. So those are just three things that are some of the benefits of being present: life satisfaction, less chances of you acting impulsively, and then also more choice and intentionality where you place your mind. But the simple practices of mindfulness, I think that a lot of different approaches look at, starting a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice, but an act that isn't really necessary. It's, I think, beneficial. And I certainly have a morning mindfulness practice, meditation practice I've been doing for a while, but not everyone's required to do that, and that doesn't work for everyone. So in some ways, it's just, how do I get present right here, right now, by just doing a check-in? Am I in my body? What's happening inside of me? 2 eyes in. What's happening with my thoughts, with my emotions, my sensations? And then 2 eyes out. What's happening in the world around me? So not getting so consumed by your inner world, but then also checking with the outer world. And eventually 1 eye in and 1 eye out, so that you're toggling back and forth of being present in your body and then being present in the moment.
1 eye in, 1 eye out. That's a really interesting and cool visualization that I've never really heard that language for it before. Could you share like an example with us of a time when maybe you noticed that you were not contacting the present moment and how you brought yourself back into it?
Sure. I think a really good example just came up a couple of days ago when my son, who was playing video games, we found out that he had entered the code to go past the amount of time allotted for the video game. So he's allotted like an hour or something on Saturday, and he had figured out how to, bypass the code to get a little more time. And of course, everything is tracked. Mm-hmm. So my son comes in, we find this out, and I go into my head and I go into this story. And this is oftentimes what happens with parents, right? If my son has bypassed the code on the video game thing, then this means that he is going to be like a compulsive liar. He's probably going to get into drugs someday. I'm just imagining him sneaking out of the house when he's 17. We completely, I go into the narrative, right? So a lot of times what pulls us out of the present is our story-making mind. So I went into the story-making mind, and here is my son in front of me, right? And I'm so into that. And then I also get totally lost in my sort of defensiveness and my planning of how I'm going to respond to this thing, that I actually miss out on the kid that's right here in front of me, that's trying to tell me about what happened. And what happened was, it was very much about a social encounter where he wanted to stay and play with his friends longer, and he was feeling pressured by his friends. And what I needed to do right then was tend to what was important, which was the emotional content of what my son was trying to share with me. And I also needed to have some more compassion for him and some more compassion for myself, and be more present in the here and now so that I could respond effectively, as opposed to responding from my worry state, or responding from my story state, or responding from my anger state. And that's sort of a teenager example, but you could have a similar example as a parent when you're talking about, a toddler that's having a tantrum in the grocery store, and you're so in your head about what other people think that you're not maybe effectively parenting with your toddler right then, right? Or doing what needs to be done. Or we could have that in a conflict with our partner. So being present is sort of a catching ourselves in some ways, like, oh my gosh, I'm somewhere other than here and now. And then bring ourselves back to, with very much a beginner's mind of just this moment, what is happening in the here and now, and how can I respond to that most effectively?
Oh, that's a lovely example. I think that so many of us can relate to in our own personal lives. And we talk a lot on this podcast about like being able to get into that non-judgmentally curious posture where we can observe our children and connect with our children and identify what the need is that they're trying to meet through whatever it is that they're doing that we might have concerns about. And but we often don't talk about what what prevents us from getting into that space, which I think your example was really helpful of how we're getting sort of caught in this web of these thoughts and these stories that are going on inside of our minds. And that just, it creates this barrier between us and the present moment and this other human that's actually standing in front of us.
Yes. And ultimately, we want everything that we are doing, we are modeling to our kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we want our kids to be more present with us in the future, our kids, when they come out, and they come into this world, kids are just little present beings. You'll be trying to ask them about their day at the dinner table, and they're so interested in what's happening with their green bean. They won't share, they won't remember, it's just like, they're so in the here and now. And as they get older, as many of us get older, we lose that contact, right? That naturally beginner's mind. So in a lot of ways, when we practice being more present with our kids, we're also training them and teaching them about how to be present in relationships. If you look at, a lot of the conflict that I see when couples come into my office, or maybe friends that are in conflict with each other, a lot of those conflicts stem from not being present, not being compassionate, and being caught up in your own story about being right. So by us changing that patterning with our kids and us doing something different, we're actually setting them up for healthier relationships down the road as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's move into acceptance. Acceptance is right there in the name for this model, so we know it's important. On the parenting side, I talk a lot about holding space for your child's emotions. And I came to that after witnessing time and again that the problem for so many parents I work with is it's not their feelings, it's the struggle with those feelings, right? It's an inability to sit in the discomfort of a feeling, and all the strategies and tactics we employ to avoid or get rid of them. That's what moves us away from the person we want to be and the relationships we want to have and the life we want to live. So talk to us about acceptance.
Well, in ACT, acceptance is not as much about like accepting your mother-in-law or accepting climate change. It's about accepting what's happening underneath your skin. So there's this acronym, TEAMS, that Kirk Strassel, who's one of the co-founders of ACT, came up with, where it's accepting the T in TEAMS, which is the thoughts, the E, emotions, the A, which is the action tendency or the urges, the M, the memories, and the S, sensations. So we have this whole world that's happening inside of us right now. So even as you and I are talking, we have like our heads, but beyond that, I have all sorts of stuff that's happening inside of me. I have a little bit of nervousness. I have a little bit of thoughts. Do people understand what I'm saying? Am I making any sense? I have a little bit of pain in my right hip because I went on a long run yesterday and it's been bugging me ever since, right? So all sorts of things that happen underneath our skin. And in acceptance, what we are doing is we're making space for all of that to be here, because there's something that is important for us to be present with in this moment, and maybe even something that we value that we want to be doing, and that the discomfort is going to come along for the ride. So the nature of pain is that our biology and our brain wants to avoid it. And that really makes a lot of sense for things like acute pain, if you injure yourself, if you're in danger, but it doesn't make so much sense with those things that show up under our skin, because often the things that are most emotionally painful for us are often the things that we care most about. When you have kids, you are basically opening yourself up to experience like the most pain you'll ever experience for the rest of your life. It's just
Accurate.
like a series of losses.
Yes.
Just loss after loss after loss. And with each one of those is also the most love and exquisite wonder and joy that you'll ever experience in your life. As Steve Hayes says, they're two sides of the same coin. So in order to have the courage and bravery to be a parent, we also need to have skills in acceptance. There's a lot of things that we do to try and not accept. And the opposite of acceptance and ACT is something called experiential avoidance. So sometimes I'll ask folks, like, put up a finger if you do any of these things. So when you have some kind of discomfort show up in relationship to your kids. Maybe it's just irritation or boredom or sadness. Do you numb out with substances, food, or technology? You can put up a finger. And then I'll say, do you ever check out by trying to distract yourself, like watching things, reading things, going on your phone, just like, I don't want to think about this. Do you ever try and avoid pain? You can put up another finger. Do you ever try and avoid pain by tensing your body, holding your breath, clenching your jaw? Your shoulders are at your ears. That's another form of experiential avoidance. Put up another finger. If you ever try and avoid the pain of parenting by like not going, like that event just sounds too uncomfortable, too socially anxious, my kid isn't too embarrassing, whatever. We're just going to like check out. We're not going to go to that. We're not going to sign up. We'll stay home. We will cancel. And then the fifth one is, do you ever avoid by being a striver? So overworking, overdoing, over perfectionism, trying to make everything perfect so that you don't have to feel the discomfort of whatever it is that you're stepping into. So if you have 5 fingers up, then you can put your hand on your heart and feel it beating and realize you are human. This is what we do, is we all have our favorites. And, my personal favorite is striving. I've written a lot on that and talking a lot about that, of how I avoid feelings of uncertainty or not good enoughness by just overdoing. And what happens is, if we keep on experientially avoiding, we end up not moving in directions that are aligned with our values. So that's where acceptance can be incredibly helpful as an alternative to that.
Thank you for walking us through that exercise. That was really cool. Like Russ Harris describes the process of ACT, I think, kind of in its simplest terms, as to be present, open up, and do what matters. And I think of acceptance as like the opening up part, the making space for whatever comes up for you. And I love that you pointed out too, it doesn't mean to accept the circumstances that are within your control to change, like staying in an abusive relationship. It kind of reminds me of that serenity prayer, right? But isn't that in AA, like accepting what you cannot change, changing what you can, and the wisdom to know the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important, because there are things that we need to make changes around. And acceptance actually can be the thing that allows us to make the change. Because I was actually just talking to this MD, PhD mindfulness teacher, Christiane Wolf, who her whole specialization is in chronic pain. And she's fascinating because her specialization is in chronic pain, but then she's also an ultra marathoner. I'm like, okay, you just are really interested in pain, aren't you? And her whole approach to pain is that actually when pain shows up, we detach from it, and it just becomes like this sort of like this mystery box that we don't even know what's in there. And part of what acceptance is, so that we can actually work with what's in there, is that we have to open the box and we have to go in and we have to look at it, get curious, lean in, and actually, like, for example, with chronic pain in the body, it would be, okay, where's the pinpoint of the pain and what are the edges of it? And the same with our emotional pain, like where is it the most intense and what are the edges of it? And once you familiarize yourself with something, once you open the door to that monster in the closet and you kind of step in and you take a look at it, it actually has less power over you. And then you have more agency to make a choice about what you're going to do about it. So maybe you have dissatisfaction in your marriage, but you never want to go in that box, right? But actually, if you go in there and you take a look at it and you explore it, then you can decide, is this something that how could I work with this? Is this something that I need to leave? Is this something that I want to continue working on? But until you do that, your hands are a bit tied. So acceptance is often the precursor to change.
Yes, it's so true. In helping my kids work through this, I sometimes talk about it like as making friends with your feelings, or making friends with this feeling, or making friends with this pain, or whatever the thing is. And sometimes I will visualize it because like they'll invite friends over and we'll grab another chair, like, and pull it up to the table for dinner. And so sometimes I'll invite them to like, we need to pull up a chair for it, and they kind of get this visual of of what that's like, rather than trying to like shove this thing in a closet and close the door. Like, let's pull up a chair for it, like give it some space, invite it to dinner, get to know it better, get to understand it better, make some space for it. Even if there are a lot of parts of it that you can't control, or that you can't fix away, that you can't rationalize away, that you can't make change. Yeah, I'm a striver. Like if I can just do this good enough and better and more, then this thing can go away. That's sort of my like inclination. Like instead, just kind of pulling up a chair for it, getting to know it better, like being curious about it, leaving space for it. That seems in some ways like such a simple thing, and yet it's actually quite profound.
Yeah, it's a simple thing. It's not something that other people are going to do with your kids. And culturally, social culturally, feelings at some point along the way of our development, we all learn that some feelings are okay to express, some feelings are okay for us to show, and some feelings are not. And it does tend to be genderized in terms of oftentimes young girls are, it's okay to be sad, but it's not okay to be angry. And for boys, you start to learn that it's okay to be angry and not okay to be sad. And, I remember it was just not that long ago, I was at a baseball game with my 9-year-old, and he was running from one base to the other, and he kind of like double checked himself, and he didn't sprint full hard. And his coach went up to him and just kind of yelled at him. And my 9-year-old started walking back to the dugout, and he was alone in the dugout. And I was on the outside kind of looking in at, you check in with your kid, how's he doing in there? And I could just see him doing everything in his power to hold back his tears. And how intensely hard he had to work to keep that in. It's not something I taught him, but he learned it. And when was it? Was it like when he was 7, or was it 7.5 or 8? Or like, was it when was that turning point where it was no longer okay to be sad if someone yelled at you? And then we fast forward, and now it's like a 49-year-old in my office, and like the wife is like, he cannot like express emotion. I'm trying to he's so heady. He just goes to problem solving and fixing everything. And I'm so frustrated with this guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, probably when he was like 7.5, he learned he needed to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So when we're doing things like pull up a chair for that feeling, it's really like that is important to do with our kids. And then we also have to check in with ourselves around what messaging are we giving our kids around what emotions are okay or not okay, because we will have our own programming around things that we're comfortable with our kids expressing or not. And like you said, emotions, there's component, there is behavioral expression of emotions. If he took his bat and he threw it at the coach or something like that, that's not a healthy way to express your feelings. But we're kind of swimming upstream here as parents, if we're trying to help our kids be able to have a broad landscape of inner emotional experiences and being able to accept them and be open to them.
Ooh, it's so true. It really kind of, the way you talk about that too, it kind of connects me back to my values, which I know we're not getting to yet, but really does connect me back to my values and sort of the broader mission that a lot of people who listen to this podcast that are connected with, of like making the world a better place through how we parent our children. And so I love this part of our conversation. I hope that's resonating with a lot of people on that level, about kind of the importance and the meaning of doing this work on yourself so you can show up in this way with your children. How the good that reverberates from that is so much more than just this moment and this interaction, and even just this family.
Mm-hmm.
Defusion, it is such a valuable tool in the ACT model, because so many of us are walking around enslaved by our thoughts, like they are a computer code that creates our reality and that we have no choice but to enact. But we don't have to give our thoughts that power, right? what are some simple strategies we can use to create some distance between ourselves and our thoughts?
Well, the very first strategy is just recognizing that you are not your thoughts. We have thoughts that are going on all day long in our mind, even as you and I are talking. My mind is saying some things, your mind is saying some things, the listeners' minds are saying some things. Some things may be related to what we're talking about, some may not, some may be critical and judgmental of you and me, maybe critical and judgmental of themselves. That is just what our mind does. It categorizes, judges, and thinks. And the practice of diffusion, and the irony is that word diffusion, DEFFUSION, is not a real word. If you try and write a book on ACT, which Debbie and I did, it will be spell checked every single time. So
there
annoying.
is a red squiggly line underneath it in my outline.
Yes. It's not a real word, which is kind of perfect because many of our thoughts are just really not helpful. And we want to be the chooser of our thoughts. As Thich Nhat Hanh has, teaches that you get to decide which seeds you want to water in your mind. And actually, the more attention you place on thoughts and the more you basically water them, the stronger those neural connections become. So for example, if you have a tendency to get hooked by worry thoughts and you go round and around the loop-de-loop of worry, then when somebody makes a comment to you, you're just more likely to pick up the worry, right? It's going to be sort of automatic because those neural networks have been strengthened over time. So what we can do instead is treat our thoughts sort of like, like either a radio station. Sometimes I'll use that as an analogy. I'll often use the analogy of a rooster because during COVID, some people got like rescue animals, some people got cats. My neighbor got a rooster. I am not kidding you. They decided they wanted to like turn their house into this little mini farm. I live up in the foothills of Santa Barbara. And so this rooster would crow 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm trying to do these podcasts and these interviews with these like very important people. And they'll be like, what is that sound? It's so odd. And I was like, yeah, it's my neighbor's rooster. So I started to approach my thoughts in the same way that I could approach that rooster, because one approach to your thoughts is to get so entangled in them that you just believe them to be true. You have a thought that I look fat in this, so that you go change your clothes 1,000 times, right? Another way to approach your thoughts is to try and fight them. You have the thought, I look fat in this, and then you go around and ask everyone, do I look fat in this? And they say, no, you look great. What do you say back? No, I think I look fat, right? If you try and argue with your thoughts in the same way that if I were trying to argue with the rooster, it's just going to fight back, right? So those two ways of either getting entangled in your thoughts or trying to fight your thoughts, there's a good amount of research that both of those actually increase your thoughts. It's the thought suppression effect in psychology, the paradox of thought control. With cognitive diffusion, what you're doing is you're getting enough space from your thought so that you make the decision, not your thought. You make the choice on where you are going to go next, what outfit you're going to wear, what, conversation you're going to have with someone podcasting while you have a rooster in the background. And your thoughts become less sort of dominant. You, the chooser, gets to be more dominant in your life.
Yes, diffusion, as I was learning about it through the context of the ACT model and then started applying it with my clients, it's really the thing that I have found that is the simplest switch to make in terms of like shifting your relationship with your thoughts. And it gives you like some really quick wins. Like it's actually really powerful and it's not hard to do. Just every time you have a thought, to say something like, I notice I'm having the thought that, and then, the thought plays. Like small switches like that actually can make a really big difference, or like writing out the story and naming it. So like if every time thoughts come up related that are a part of the I'm not a good enough mom story, right? Every time those thoughts come up, you just say, oh, here's the I'm not a good enough mom story again. Just, I know that story. Like, go ahead, you can play out. I'm still going to be here cooking dinner and smelling the smells and laughing at my son's jokes. The story can play on. So that creating a bit of that distance, exactly like you described, of noticing the thought is there and that it's just a thought, like it doesn't actually have any power over you. I found that to be actually pretty, I don't know if I want to use the word easy, but pretty relatively easy in terms of some of the, some of this inner work can be really hard, and this one can actually be pretty quick and pretty powerful.
Yeah, it depends on how sticky your thoughts are, right? So for some of our most self-critical thoughts, they can feel all encompassing and they can feel really true, especially when it's like middle of the night thinking, it just feels so intense and powerful and true. And sometimes for me, when thoughts get that scary or that intense or that loud, I will even move to just, can I be in my body right now? Because my head is just so unhelpful. Like, can I just focus on my feet on the floor? Can I feel myself ground in the present moment? Can I bring myself to my breath? Can I feel whatever sensation I'm feeling in my emotional self? Like sometimes we need that much space from our thoughts because they're just so intense. But it's interesting because I think most of our upbringing and most of popular culture teaches us to do really different things about thoughts. I mean, there's certainly been there was a big self-esteem movement in the 80s, which actually the research panned out to not necessarily support, which was like, you are good, you are special, you are awesome. Yeah, argue with the thoughts or even replace thoughts with more positive thoughts. Yeah. And that, if that works for you, then go for it. But if you notice that when you try and do that, you're just arguing back against it, which is what a lot of people will do, defusion can be just a little simpler way just to take a sidestep from, one step away from your thoughts.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really don't even realize that their thoughts are not reality or necessarily like truth with a capital T. So even sometimes just being given that perspective or being given like permission to shift your relationship with your thoughts for them to just be thoughts and not, like I said, like that code that decides who you are and what reality is. I have found that to be pretty powerful. Like it definitely can shift things enough to get you moving on another trajectory, I find.
Yeah, I think a rule of thumb around thoughts are sort of like a similar rule of thumb around emails. Whenever you get an email that's in all caps that says like important, you must respond to this within the next 24 hours or your bank account will close, in all caps, like don't open that email. So the same is true for your mind. When your mind is like that, it's probably in some kind of threat response, it's some kind of emergency state that it's probably the last thing that you want to listen to in this moment.
Yes. That's a really funny metaphor. My favorite like diffusion technique, I think, is the leaves on a stream. Like if my thoughts are really like spinning very quickly and I'm starting to feel myself get hooked on them, to kind of close my eyes and take a breath. And like you said, sort of ground myself in the physical space, notice what I can hear and all that, while picturing all of my thoughts floating by like leaves on a stream. Something about that visualization is really calming to me. And it reminds me that, they come, they go. I have no control over when they come or go or what leaves fall, and to just let them be. and that works really well for me. I find that helpful.
Yeah, that's a great one. I do a similar one, clouds in the sky. I'm sort of like, imagine myself lie on the ground, clouds in the sky. And I actually I have meditations, ACT meditations on Insight Timer. And I have a cognitive diffusion one. It's free in that app, the Insight Timer app, that's clouds in the sky. So it's like 10 minutes long where you could, if you're having trouble with your thoughts, you could just put that on and practice putting your thoughts on clouds. It's kind of relaxing. Yeah.
It's so relaxing. Okay, we'll have to link to that at the end too. Okay, self as context. We also talk a lot about narratives here. So I love that this model gets a little bit meta and zooms out to acknowledge that there's a part of you that's doing all the noticing and making meaning of all our experiences. Can you walk us through how we can take perspective on our self stories?
Yeah, this one, when Debbie Sorensen and I were writing the ACT Daily Journal, we actually called this chapter perspective taking as opposed to self as context. Because again, I think Steve Hayes, I was actually just talking to Joseph Sorochi, who's another ACT researcher for the Your Life and Process podcast. And we were just talking about how Steve Hayes likes to make up words and make things way more complicated. He just likes to make things sound more complicated in there. So perspective taking, we can all understand that.
Yes.
Self as context, my goodness. But okay, to put some context onto self as context, when we're caught up in our self story, we are caught up in really identifying with our ego, basically, like identifying with like, I am a mother. I am a teacher. I am the type of person who I am nice. I am mean. I am good at math, whatever it is. And we don't have sort of that grander view of seeing that we are much more contextual than we think we are. Like sometimes I'm nice, but I wasn't last night when I was talking to my sister on the phone. It depends on context, right? And being able to first just take perspective on yourself and seeing yourself as a contextual being is part of it. But another aspect to, I think, this perspective taking process is that we can cultivate and develop a compassionate perspective on ourselves, and we can choose a compassionate perspective. Even though compassion is not one of the 6 core processes, it sort of is an umbrella that is overarching in every single one. And I think in particular with this one of how do we cultivate a more compassionate mind, a mind that takes a perspective that sees that we're interconnected, sees that it's not just us as individuals in the world, but rather we're part of something bigger and even can transcend our small self. So how I do that, how I practice both perspective taking with myself and then also trying to take perspective, other people's perspectives, because that's at the sort of root of empathy and conflict resolution, right? But how I do that is sometimes I'll do a practice of like, okay, if I have a problem right now that I am struggling with, oftentimes when you have a problem that you're struggling with, it's been around for a while, right? And maybe you have a pattern that you've been kind of caught up in. If you were to look at your life as sort of a timeline and you were to imagine yourself when this problem first showed up for you, like maybe 10 years ago, whatever, 15 years ago, and you were to give yourself some advice then, what advice would you give yourself? And then if you were to look forward into the future of your timeline and maybe a version of you that was 20 years older than you were to show up and they were to see you in your problem right now and the thing that's most hard for you that you're struggling with, that you can't like get perspective on, what would they say? What advice would they give you? And just that little simple exercise, what you're doing is you're using your own wise mind, your own compassionate mind to get perspective on something that maybe you have a hard time getting any kind of traction around. But we can do the same thing with like others, oftentimes when we're with our kids, we're so stuck in our point of view and what we know is right. And we think that we have all the wisdom as the parent and because we've been through so much, and we don't take the moment to just get behind the eyes of our kid. Like, what was their night's sleep like? Are they hungry? Are they feeling overwhelmed by something at school? Are they just in a developmental stage where they're learning something,
Yeah.
And what is it like to be them? So that's another perspective taking practice, is getting behind the eyes of another.
That's helpful. And I love the like connecting with the inner mentor of yourself, like 20 years in the future. One that I find helpful in working with my clients is asking them how they would respond if their adult child came to them with this problem or this perspective on their story, right? Like, what would you say in response to them if they presented this meaning about this thing that happened to them or this thought they had or this feeling they had? Like, how would you respond? And I find that helps them tap into a lot more compassion. Of course, also like if a dear beloved friend of yours, like mama friend, came to you with this story, like how would you respond? Like what sort of alternative perspective would you offer? Because it tends to be easier for us to tap into compassion for our loved ones than for ourselves, sadly.
Absolutely. And we all have a compassionate mind in there. It's just sometimes it's hard to access. And that's where perspective taking or self as context can be really helpful.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to values, because values are my jam, and my emphasis on values guided action is actually how I kept bumping into the ACT model in the first place. So I sometimes describe values as our compass, pointing us in the direction of the person we want to be and the life we want to live. How can we identify our values?
Well, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of different roads to values. And oftentimes when people are coming into therapy with me, the thing that's motivating them to come in is that there's something that a way in which they're living, that there's a discrepancy between how they want to be and how they're acting.
Yes.
So one pathway to values is pain. And if you look at, what's most painful for you. So say you have a family relationship that's really conflictual, or there's a pain point at work for you, or there's a pain point with your kids, that video game example I gave with my son. Like why is that painful for me that he punched in some code to get 20 more minutes of time? Well, because it connects to my values. And if you look at, okay, let me just dig under a little bit more what's underneath that. Okay, he punch code something over time. What does it connect to my values? I have values around wanting my kid to be really healthy. I really value teaching him, sort of honesty. And I really value the health of his body and mind, and not being on a screen for hours on end. Right. and teaching him and helping him have that experience. Right. So that's one avenue. But the other avenue that's kind of fun, and I think can be really helpful, in particular with parenting when we're burned out, because parental burnout is real. It is a classification that's different than depression or anxiety. And one of the things that is what parental burnout is characterized by is you experience a sense of detachment. Not only you're physically and emotionally exhausted, you start to detach a little bit from your kids, and you start to not feel joy. And I think parents will feel this at some point in their lives. They may have points in their parenting where they just like sitting down and playing Monopoly with your child, just like it. I just can't get there. I would rather go. There's actually some research that shows that parents find more joy in doing things like exercising and watching TV, but more meaning in their parenting. So when you can use values to help bring more vitality back to parenting when you are burned out. And what that looks like is getting clear on what it is that you care most about in parenting and engaging in that. And then it starts to revitalize you. So if you think about, over the past week, what were the moments that were most meaningful to you in parenting? And they may be like really simple ones. Like sometimes for me, it's just, I had this moment where I sat down on the couch and my kid he's really into finger knitting, and he was finger knitting, and I had a cup of tea and we were just hanging out, and he's telling me about what he was doing. It's like sort of like a nothing moment, but it was probably one of the more meaningful moments of my day. When you check in and you check in from a body-based way of like, what really makes me feel vitality in parenting? What are those meaningful moments? Then you can uncover what your values are. And then you can start to use those values to guide your action around parenting. Because maybe I would want to make more time for sitting on the couch with my kid finger knitting than the time that I'm spending sweeping the kitchen floor. And maybe I can let the kitchen floor be a little bit dirty to take those extra 5 minutes to finger knit.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. I think like walking through a dream day can help us identify our values in much the like solution focused way that you're talking about, where you can like imagine like you're no longer limited by any of the things that you see as limitations. And I always include the one caveat that the people in your life are still exactly as they are. So, like if you have a neurodivergent child, they will still be neurodivergent, but like imagine, miracle question style, like a miracle occur while you're sleeping, boom, you're dropped into your dream life. You're the person you want to be. Walk me through that day before you even open your eyes. What do you hear? And what do you feel? Is there sunlight like streaming through your eyelids? And then just we walk through that whole day. And that can help to give us clues about like what things you really value as you walk through that day. What are the highlights that come through? And then, like you mentioned, thoughts and feelings can be a signal for our values in the sense that we feel like this discomfort when we're out of alignment with our values. So if I'm having this recurring thought or feeling, one of the things I do is check in with it. Like, is this a signal for me that there's something that where some instance in my life where I'm out of alignment with my values? And then even judgment that comes up as we witness others can actually be helpful in highlighting what matters to us. Like, I know judgment gets a really bad rap, but it can be useful. Like, it can serve a purpose. If we are witnessing something and we're feeling discomfort rise in us, that can be a signal like, oh, that's something that I would make a different choice for my life because it's out of alignment with this value, right? Even jealousy.
Yeah, I was just going to say envy.
Yes.
In particular, my first episode on my new podcast was all about values, and in it, I asked a series of questions, and one of them was, "Who do you envy?" And that when we turn towards envy, is that they're embodying something that I want to embody. Then we can take that energy and actually start to embody it. Because the thing about values that I think is really important is that values are qualities of action. So they're sort of the adverbs and verbs of how you are being in the here and now. So just like you said, yeah, you can point yourself north, but you can point yourself north wherever you are on the planet. You don't have to wait for some future point in time to live your values, because values are qualities of action right here. So if I want to be with you on this podcast, feeling engaged with my parenting, then I'm living out that value by talking about engaged parenting with you, right?
Yeah.
If I want to, practice kindness, at work, I can do that in my work situation, but can I also do that while I'm talking about my clients to another, colleague? Am I being kind? So there's you living out your values is something that one thing nobody else really knows what your values are. They're like favorite colors. Yours may be purple and mine may be green. Only you really know. And it's up to you to tune in and make that discernment. And sometimes living your values doesn't look so impressive on the outside. It just sometimes it looks really kind of simple and plain, but it feels different on the inside.
Yes. Okay. Effective action. I'm so impressed. We are like all like I was being very hopeful that we would be able to get through this. And I like you so much. I knew I would have so much I wanted to say. So I'm excited. We have made it to the final side of that Rubik's Cube, as you said, with effective action. For years, I have talked about how everything you say or do is either a step toward the parent you want to be or away from the parent you want to be, a step into connection or away from it. So I love the language that the ACT model gives around taking committed and effective action toward what and who you care about. I also love the removal of judgment in language like workable. It's not necessarily about right or wrong, but is this behavior helping you to be the person you want to be and to live the life you want to live? Is it working, essentially? And I especially love that for conversations with teens, by the way. Ultimately, all of this boils down to the choice point where we can make towards moves or away moves, right? We can plan small, observable behavioral changes. So my question for you is, what are some of the pitfalls you have seen people make in these efforts, and how can we avoid them?
Well, the first pitfall is always trying to make our leap too big.
Yes.
That's often the biggest one. But I also think we have to take whatever our change plan is and cut it in half and cut it in half again. But I think that the other one that I see a lot of is we move our finish line out before we even get there or even get to feel the satisfaction and the reward of completing something. That sort of psychological hydration. If you were thinking about a marathon runner, they're stopping at the rest stops and they're taking in the hydration along the way. And when we get kind of caught up in this sort of change action-based mentality, it's wonderful, but if we are in a productive optimization state and we're just kind of moving from the next to the next to the next and checking things off of our list, then we're not really taking in the good of the reward of living our values. So I think that's the other common thing that I see is either people make a commitment to a change that's too big because motivation comes in waves, as BJ Fogg would say, and they're at the top of the motivation wave and they're like, okay, so I'm going to cut out sugar for 30 days, right? And by 2:00, they're like, give me the, whatever coffee nib. Or the other one is not really taking in the good of the small gains and the small moves and really landing that as a reinforcer. So what we know about behavior change is it's a pretty simple model, is that there's usually a cue that triggers you to take action, to make a behavior happen. And then there's a reward or consequence after you do a behavior. So for example, say you want to not check your phone as much. Many of us are on our phones way more than we want to be. We want to be modeling healthy technology use to our kids, yada, yada. The cue may be just the phone is on the kitchen counter. The behavior is you pick up the phone, and then the reward is you get that little dopamine hit from seeing whatever you see, right? And so the reward is what makes the behavior happen again. And the cue is what triggers you to do the behavior in the first place. With effective action, what we're trying to do is not necessarily get rid of the cues, because there's always going to be cues in our life. But what we're going to do is use those other processes to help guide our behavior and guide our consequence. So say that the phone is on the table and you notice now, because you're being present, you notice the urge to pick it up. You use your first Rubik's Cube side of being present. And then you use the acceptance side of can I accept and feel that urge in my body without acting on it? Here it is, to pick up my phone. And then you may clue into perspective taking. Okay, wait, I remembered there's a part of me, a future self that doesn't want, or a past self that doesn't want me to pick up the phone right now because I'm modeling something to my kids or whatever. Or you may use your values. What's most important for me in this moment? What do I really want to tend to? Maybe I want to look at my kid in the eyes, or maybe I want to, finish whatever project I'm doing. So we check in and use those other processes. And then we do the new behavior, the effective action, the values-based behavior, the committed action, whatever you want to call it. And then when the consequence happens, which is we've done something new, we really savor and take in the reward of I'm acting in line with the type of person I want to be in the world. This is it. This is what I want to be. And no one will know that was a tiny win for you, but you. So that's committed action to me. And it's small, it's tiny, it's micro. But you do that enough times, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks from now, you're not picking up your phone as much.
That's exactly it. The biggest pitfall I see, just like you said, is trying to take bites that are too big and then choking on them. So breaking, virtually everyone needs to break down the things they're trying to do in the smaller steps. When I'm working with parents who are trying to go from a lifetime of being raised not on this gentle parenting path to being a gentle parent overnight, and they want to change everything and be different and have their whole relationship be different, I'll invite them to no, let's just pick one thing. And then I want you to just do it one time today, and then savor that moment when you do it that one time. Yes, we will work through all the sides of the Rubik's Cube to get you all prepared. And then I just want you to do it once, no more than once. Every other time I want you to respond as you normally would. And then after 3 days of that, we'll do it 2 times, right? That is how change happens. That really is. It may seem slow, but if you try to, sometimes you got to slow down to go fast. You got to slow down to actually make that progress. So, okay.
And I would say that's how we learn. We can learn a lot from our kids by watching them and how they learn. Because, when you teach your kids how to read, they start with, just the ch sound and the sound and the la sound. And it's frustrating for them because they're like, this is so boring. And then you give them the Bob books and there's 3 words per page. Like, this is the most boring book on the planet, right? I'm reading Bob sat down. But that's how learning happens. It's through these little small building blocks that you put together. And we are no different from that. So we can take in a little bit of humility, like be humble, let yourself make mistakes, and let yourself be a learner, because this is what learning feels like. It's uncomfortable and it's slow. And it also opens the door to, like, then your kid is intrinsically reading books that they love and you're off to the races, and it's, it's lifelong.
Okay, let's move into the Q&A. I asked the Sage Family Village what questions they had about ACT, and we have a great question relating to acceptance. And we talked about this a lot already, so I know that the answers should be brief. I know we're running out of time. The majority of folks in our Sage Family Village are radical. They're questioning the status quo, breaking intergenerational cycles, and shifting cultural tides around the world. A struggle that can often come along with this work is knowing when to accept a situation and when to push back in the hope of making positive change. Do you have any insight to share on how to make this discernment? It can be tricky for some of us to tell.
Well, I think it goes back to just that definition of acceptance, because when we're talking about acceptance, I'm talking about you're not approving necessarily of something, you're not acquiescing, you're not saying that something's okay. What you're doing is you're acknowledging and making room for. So, when or how to make a change, I think is really sort of the bigger question in that, because I think there'll be acceptance involved in any change. There's usually discomfort whichever way you turn. And that's where values comes in terms of, if you're turning towards something that you care about and there's discomfort along the way, then that's par for the course. It's hard to answer the question, like, a lot of times clients will come in and be like, should I leave my marriage? Or should I, pull my kid from this school and put him in that school? And that's sort of your inner job to figure out. And oftentimes there isn't one right answer. It's sort of you take your best guesstimate and trust yourself along the way that you'll practice self-compassion and compassion for others and acceptance and all these other things. And ultimately it's going to be a windy path.
Yeah. What I find helpful is to get crystal clear on what is within my control and what is not. And sometimes I will even literally draw this out, like on a piece of paper, and write it out, because a lot of the living in alignment with my values, a lot of the action that I do is big stuff in service of making huge cultural shifts. And so the acceptance piece for me is in, okay, what can I control? Like, I can control that I can show up to the Capitol and take a meeting with this representative, or I can, like whatever the pieces are that are within my control. These are all the different things I can do. Like, if we're talking about anti-racist work, right? Like, these are all the things that I can do. And then here are the things that are not within my control. Like, I can't make racism not exist tomorrow, right? Like, I can't make my relative be different than they are. Like, so for me, what I find helpful in that acceptance piece in some of these bigger things that we're trying to work on is just being very crystal clear about what is within my control and what is not. And that might sound like an oversimplified answer, but I find it really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes it's in thinking about, I was on this summit with Sonia Renee Taylor, and she's this major player in, she wrote the book, The Body's Not an Apology. It's a fantastic book. And I had come on to talk about ACT and body image. And I watched her keynote before I got the benefit of watching her keynote before I was coming on to speak. And after I watched her keynote, I was like, I got to change some of my slides here because I got it wrong. Because some of my slides were really about body acceptance, and you don't have to like it to accept it, and all these things that I was saying. And what she was really teaching on was radical self-love. And that she was saying, it's more, we need more than acceptance here. We need like radical self-love in order to get beyond and above the degree of, body trauma some people have, especially for her, a woman of color, a large woman of color. And that kind of shifted my view on acceptance a bit. Of acceptance is about, yes, like allowing and making space for whatever shows up under our skin. And the next step of radical love and what that looks like, that can look like taking really big action, like going to the, fighting against something to make a change in terms of the laws. But sometimes radical self-love or radical love is something as small as, in being humble and being willing to take a different perspective, or in our own family, how are we interacting with one another? Are we embodying the change that we want the world to be within our conversations with our family? So it's, I think it's really individual and personal to you in terms of what that looks like and feels like in your life.
Yes. Okay. I'm adding that book to my read list.
Oh, she's great. Yeah. You'll love her.
Okay, let's move into our deep dive. So the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast75, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic? And of course, we're going to link to your website and your Instagram. I love following along there. Your Life in Process podcast. I've got to get my hands on an ACT daily journal, by the way. I've been recommending that to people, but I haven't gotten to do it myself yet. So that's at the top of my list. And then you have a Foundations of ACT course, right?
Yeah, it's one of the few courses out there for the general public, which is interesting. And that's really been my interest and my passion is bringing these concepts that have been passed around amongst therapists and coaches and researchers to actually directly to the general public, because I see them as I started the conversation about, it's not just about therapy, it's about a lifestyle. Like it's an ACT lifestyle. It's a psychologically flexible lifestyle that we all could benefit from. So my Foundations of ACT course breaks ACT down into the 6 core processes. And there are just little 10-minute videos. I have handouts, I have worksheets, I have meditations, and it's a really great way to learn ACT if you're a coach and therapist and you want to use all those handouts with your clients, or if you want to do it for yourself on your own time on demand. I also have a lot of meditations on Insight Timer. As I mentioned, those are all free. I have a course on Insight Timer that's all audio. And the best way, I think, if you want to just keep in the loop in terms of other stuff that I'm up to, is to actually, if you go to my website, I have like one of those pop-up things. And if you sign up for that, you'll get this. I was thinking, it'd be so cool if we had an ACT vision board. Do you know how people do vision boards at the beginning of the year? I was like, I want to do a vision board for my year, but have it be all about the processes. How am I going to do these processes in my life? So you get this free ACT vision board, but then you'll also get signed up for my newsletter. And there's just lots of different ways to do it. And I really think learning ACT is a personal journey. And who do you resonate with? Like who are the teachers that really you can resonate with and relate to? Because those are the ones that maybe you'll be able to learn best from. And that may be in a reading format, it may be a blog format, it may be Instagram, it may be workshop style, whatever works for you.
Yes. I mentioned, I read the ACT Made Simple book from Russ Harris, and I took his ACT for Beginners, but that's really for clinicians. And so the way that you bring, that you are relatable in how you show up and you bring ACT to everyone else, it's beautiful and digestible and relatable. And I have your Foundations of ACT course linked, and I recommend it to people. And like I said, I want to get my hands on your ACT Daily Journal because I recommend that to a lot of people as well. So thank you sincerely for showing up how you do in alignment with your values and sharing this with so many people who really benefit from receiving it.
Well, thank you. It's so fun to have a conversation with somebody that's so steeped in it, because you know where we're going, and you you have all of your exercises and ideas, and it's just really personalized, right? What works for you and what you resonate with. So I really appreciated your expertise. It really felt like a collaborative joint venture in exploring ACT together. So thank you.